All right, here we have our first lesson in current events on how to tell if a source is credible. We've been kind of looking at this over the past few days in class, but I haven't really told you, like, here's the exact tools you need. So I would like to talk to you today about some of the tools that you'll need to tell if a source is credible or not. So let's get to it. What makes a source credible? Why? What would make a source more trustworthy in your eyes? There's just some of the questions that I looked at, and some of you were telling me things like, oh, the website looks pretty. That's how I know it's good. Or a lot of people went to that site. That's how I know. Or, you know what? I just kind of winged it. And, for fantasy football, that's okay because the stakes aren't very high. If your fantasy football team doesn't do very well, then, you know, right? It's not a big deal. But if you start believing things about like how to spend your money wrong, how to vote wrong, there's so many lies out there that can have real consequences for you. It could, if you believe everything you hear and see, it could break your relationships, right? That's like a worst case scenario, right? But I'm just trying to give you tools for how you can make sure that at least have some idea of how to figure out if a source is credible or trustworthy. So one of the keys to this is one of the three keys that we're going to look at. One of the keys here to determining credibility is finding out who is behind the information that you are reading or watching. Most of you, I assume, are going to watch news content on your phones more than you're going to read it in newspapers or maybe even read news articles. So I want to throw in that watching part too. How do you know that the information is credible? You've got to understand the source. Who's behind the source? Who is making the information? Who is making the video that you're watching or writing the article that you're reading? If you find out about those people behind the scenes, the organizations and the individuals behind the scenes of the things you're reading and watching, you can start to determine credibility. There you go. It's underlined to make sure that you got it. Okay, so you really want to ask a couple questions about who's behind the information. You want to ask about their qualifications and you want to ask about their expertise. If they are qualified to be talking about the topic in which they're talking about, then the idea is that the source might be more credible. If they're an expert in the area that they say that they're talking about, then that's going to help out too. Usually, people have titles after their names, like doctor before their name or PhD or something like that after their name. And most of the time, you'll know that there's at least some expertise there, Stop it. Stop it. Why are you doing that? What happened? I want it to go away. There. Thank you. What is their expertise? You quit that right now. Right? Are they qualified to talk about what they're talking about? The dude on TikTok yesterday that said that the government's trying to starve us out, I don't even think he was a farmer. He's not qualified. And even the farmers that we looked at, one of them, admitted that his video was a joke. He wasn't really serious. So you've got to look at their qualifications for the people. You also have to look at their motivation. Why are they making the thing that you're reading or the thing that you're watching? If you can find out what their motivation is, then that can tell you something, right? About the information that they're giving you. So let's take this hypothetical situation, right? What if Saturday school was mandatory? We'd have to make it mandatory, right? Because nobody would come if it wasn't mandatory. Like how many of you would come to Saturday school if it wasn't mandatory? Come on, be honest, right? Be honest. Like this is what would happen if it wasn't mandatory. Attendance isn't mandatory. Peace out. I'm disappearing. I hope you found that a little bit funny. I like that meme. Okay. But let's say that it is. Let's say that it's mandatory that the Circleville Board of Education is trying to debate and discuss, should we have mandatory Saturday school? And you feel strongly about this one way or another, right? You want to express your opinion to the board. You want them to hear your voice because you feel that strongly about it. How would you go about choosing your sources? You're going to go speak to the board president, the superintendent, all the board members, and all the people that are in the audience there too. They're all adults. How would you go about choosing the sources of information that you're going to bring to the table to tell the board how you feel about this Saturday school? What you don't want to have happen is for you to get laughed out of the room. You don't want to be laughed out of the room. Here's President Trump before the United Nations.
In less than 2 years, my administration has made. In less than 2 years, my administration has accomplished more than almost any administration in the history of our country. America's so true. Didn't expect that reaction, but that's okay.
He made a really bold claim there, and you hopefully could hear the result, right? There were people in the room laughing at him, right? You don't want to be left out of the room. So, how do you go about doing research? Now, here is a source. Okay, do me a favor. Take this sheet of paper. There it is. Take that sheet of paper. I want you to start looking at the source. You also have this handout too, so if you want to look at it there as well. I want you to start looking at the source. Question number 1 for source A. I want you to read through it. And I'll help you out here too if you want. This is the Project for More Learning. And one of their tweets says, "We strongly support the growing movement for our mandatory Saturday school. Our young people deserve the best public education possible. By committing an additional day of school to every week, we move closer to delivering that excellent education." Subtweet, "Research shows that young people forget a great deal of content every weekend." You know it's true. You know you've done it. That's why I never, ever, ever, almost never have tests on Monday because, right? By making Saturday school mandatory, we can reduce the amount of information they forget by 50% and ensure that they learn far more each year of school. Join us in supporting nationwide mandatory Saturday school. I want you real quick on 1A to summarize what the argument is that the school is that this Project for More Learning is making. What is the argument the source is making? Number 1. Now, for number 2, what qualifications or expertise does the source have on the topic of Saturday school? You've been doing research. You want to be educated on this so you don't get laughed at when you go in front of the board and you look here and you see this tweet and you're like, oh, there's some interesting stats. Oh, it must be credible because there's stats. Does that make it credible? I mean, look on here. What can you see? The Project for More Learning. Look at some of this over here. Are you impressed by their stats? Do you see any qualifications or expertise for this? Please explain that for number 2. Number 3, why might the source want to make this argument about Saturday school? In other words, what's the motivation behind them, behind their idea that they want more Saturday school? And by the way, if you did not put that for number 1, you should put that for number 1, because in number 1, it should say, obviously they want more Saturday school. They want to have Saturday school. They want to be mandatory. Look at this right here. What is the motivation for the people at the Project for More Learning? Go ahead and write down number 3. Now, for number 3, after you got done with writing down your answer to number 3, did you think about the money motivation behind this? If the National School Lunch Providers Association is funding them, what is the motivation behind the National School Lunch Providers Association? What could they possibly want? Why could they possibly want Saturday school? What's their motive? If you said the National Lunch Providers Association wants to have more money, then I think you're right. I think you're absolutely right. I think that this made-up source, obviously this is all make-believe, right? But this made-up source wants to have an extra day of school so they can provide an extra day's worth of lunches so they can get more money, more profits. And I want you to think about that. Does that make them an expert? Do they care about the community, our community, or not? What's your gut instinct? Maybe they do, maybe they don't. But do you see where the motivation lies here? So number 4, how much do you trust this as a source about whether or not there should be mandatory Saturday school? Would you, for number 4, please write down it for number 4, would you be using this and the stats they provide and the arguments they provide? Would you be using this when you go in front of the Board of Education to make your presentation? All right, let's go to letter B, source B. Here we have the Community Sports Alliance Facebook page. It's a public group. Let's take a look at this. Read through it real quick and then answer number 1. What argument does the source make about Saturday school? Okay, and I'll kind of read through it with you just in case you need that. Somebody posted on this. Greg Coffey posted on this group's page. I just heard that the school district is considering making Saturday school mandatory for everyone. As the president of the Community Sports Alliance. Okay, so this dude right here is telling us that he's the president of this Community Sports Alliance. Okay. So that's his position. Let's just trust him and take him at his word here, because you never know, he might be lying. Have you ever seen anybody lie on Facebook, right? But let's just pretend for the sake of this that he's not lying, that he is the president of the Community Sports Alliance here in town. I'm incredibly worried about this proposal, and I'm writing to ask you to join me in opposing it. As you probably know, the vast majority of our games, matches, and meets across sports, so across all sports, happen on Saturdays. Yes, we play on weeknights and sometimes Sundays, but Saturdays are by far the most popular game time and easiest time to schedule. If Saturday school became mandatory for everyone in the district, I'm not sure our league could survive. Please consider joining me in opposing mandatory Saturday school. Number 1, What argument does this source make about Saturday school? Write it down. Answer. If you put down there that they oppose mandatory Saturday school, then that's what I'm looking for. If you didn't put that down, erase it and write it out, okay? What qualifications or expertise does this Greg Coffey have? Number 2. Is there a reason to trust him? Does he know what he's talking about? Now, if you've written something down already, hopefully you have, do you think that the president of the local sports community sports alliance would know what he's talking about when he says we got a lot of Saturday games and this would mess up our Saturday game schedule? If you go on the back of the page, number 3, what might make this source, why might the source want to make this argument about Saturday school? What is Greg Coffey's motivation? Why is he saying what he's saying? Now, you might agree with Greg Coffey. In fact, most of you who are athletes probably do. But does that mean he's right? No, sorry. Does that mean he's credible? Does that mean he's trustworthy? If you don't know what credible means, it means trustworthy. Number 4, how much do you trust this source? Is this something that you would be willing to bring to the Board of Education? When you make an argument about this, is this a source that you would use? Source C. Dr. Turner's blog. Now, if you look on Source C, on your paper version of Source C, you see at the top, it says that Dr. Turner is a professor of education at a local university. So she's got that EDD or PhD after her name, that doctorate of education or the PhD in education, one of the two. Read through it. What argument does she make about Saturday school? And here I'll do some reading for you as well. Thoughts on PISA. We must find ways to help our students learn more. PISA, the Program for International Student Assessment. So if you don't know what that is, it's people who look at standardized test scores and make recommendations about the state of education in the U.S. So the Program for International Student Assessment looked at America's results for 2015, and those were released last week. And they showed that, once again, American students are lagging behind many countries in the world. People have been saying this for a generation now, that the United States is lagging behind. Oh, no. I'm sure there's some truth to that. But we also teach everybody and test everybody. And not every school, not every country around the world has schools that test everybody. A lot of them test the brighter students and even educate the brighter students, right? So anyway, but there is an argument to be made here that we need a better education system. But regardless, according to the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, which runs the PISA, the scores of American students stayed about the same as they were the last time the test was administered 3 years before. And in science and reading, and the scores got worse in math. Math's awful anyway. Oh, don't tell your math teacher that said that, Mr. Bega. Our average scores across all 3 subject areas are lower than countries including Canada, Estonia, that's in Europe, Finland, Germany, China, Ireland, Japan, New Zealand, Korea, Singapore, Slovenia. I'm not sure what the best solution to this is. Perhaps we should invest in teacher education and support. Perhaps we should extend the school day or institute mandatory Saturday school so students would have more learning time in class. Perhaps we need to radically change how we're teaching, or perhaps we need to do all of these things. Now, first of all, what's her argument? And yes, if you put that she's in favor of mandatory Saturday school, at least a little bit, then you're right. That's the answer there. What qualifications or expertise does this source have? This should be the easiest one to answer. Number 2. Hint: she's got the most expertise and better qualifications than anybody else in these 3 sources. Right? She's got the doctorate degree in the field that we're talking about in education. It's not like she's a doctorate of rocket science or brain surgery talking about education, because that would be different, right? But she's got a degree in the thing we're talking about, education. 3. What are the motivations? Write it down. Why do you think she's saying this? Write it down. Number 4. How much do you trust this source? Now, will you please look? There it says source A, source B, source C. Circle one of those, please. Which one do you think is the most credible? We circle it. And then I want you to think why. Why is that the most credible source? So some things to think about. Which of these documents would you take with you to a board meeting when you're going to express yourself and your opinion about mandatory Saturday school before the whole Board of Education? Remember that the PhD is her blog. It's not like it's something she published. It's her personal blog. Blogspot.com. Maybe that doesn't matter to you, but usually blogs aren't the best sources of information, right? Think about each of these different groups. The Project for More Learning, who's funding them? Where's the money coming from? The Community Sports Alliance, where's the money coming from? Dr. Turner's blog, where's her money coming from? What's their mission? What's their what's their mission of these different organizations and people, right? And what's their motivation? Which one do you trust more?